Go. Good afternoon. Hello, I'm Don Cunningham, President and CEO of the Lehigh Valley Economic Development Corporation. Thank you for joining us for this Congressional Forum between the candidates of the 7th Congressional District here in Pennsylvania, Congresswoman Susan Wild of the Democratic Party and Lisa Scheller of the Republican Party. Before we get started with tonight's debate, I want to thank all of those involved in LVEDC for helping us support this debate. Lehigh Valley Economic Development Corporation is a bipartisan, nonpartisan coalition of public and private sector members to advance economic growth across the Lehigh Valley. We were started 25 years ago by the CEOs and business leaders of the Lehigh Valley in a different time and a different place. This afternoon, we are here on the former work site of Bethlehem Steel Corporation, currently Arts Quest at Steel Stacks. And LVEDC was begun to market the economic assets of the Lehigh Valley and to work across governments and the private sector on strategies to make sure that this region remains competitive. And just a couple of facts, fast forwarding 25 years from the beginning of LVEDC, today the Lehigh Valley's gross domestic product is over $41 billion a year for the first time. We are the 66th largest economy for metropolitan areas in the United States. If we were a country, we would have the 90th largest economy in the world. And probably most importantly, the economic sectors in the Lehigh Valley are very balanced. Today, the sector of finance, insurance, and real estate is our largest sector of economic output at $7.8 billion, and our largest employment area is healthcare, with more than 60,000 workers. But most importantly, manufacturing remains a critical and big part of the Lehigh Valley economy. Over 700 manufacturers in the Lehigh Valley generate $7.3 billion in economic output every year and are responsible for 34,000 jobs, almost 12% of the total employment in the Lehigh Valley. Obviously, the events of this year have been an economic challenge for all of us across the United States, and the Lehigh Valley has been no exception as we've seen unemployment rise. However, we are also seeing a quick recovery. Today, we have 24,000 more jobs in the Lehigh Valley than we had the depth of the last recession in 2009. So our economy has been affected negatively, but many of our sectors continue to grow as we see job postings starting to reemerge in the Lehigh Valley. And finally, and most importantly, a recent Chmura economics analysis of the Lehigh Valley forecasts a return to pre-pandemic job numbers in major employment sectors by the first quarter of 2022, with an increase projected in some of those sectors. So we find ourselves in challenging times at a difficult time, and it's probably no more relevant than ever that we have the two candidates running for the 7th Congressional District with us today. And under normal circumstances, this event would have a large in-person audience, but the coronavirus has made that impossible. So in accord with public health standards, we are limited the number of people attending, and this forum will be viewed primarily online. Thanks for technology, we're able to do that for you. A video of the recording will be available on the LVEDC website shortly after we are finished. And it will remain accessible to everyone through Election Day on November 3rd. Now, I want to introduce the candidates, give you a little bit of background, and give you a little bit of housekeeping ground rules around today's forum. Susan Wild was elected to the House of Representatives in 2018. Before her election to Congress, Susan was an attorney in the Lehigh Valley and the first female solicitor of the city of Allentown. Lisa Scheller is the chairman and president of Silberline, a manufacturer of ingredients for paints and coatings in Schuylkill County. But Lisa served on the Lehigh County Board of Commissioners and was chairwoman of the board for 2 years. Before we begin, just a couple quick comments. This event is not structured like a debate. It will be a sharing of thoughts and ideas in response to questions about economic growth and job creation in the Lehigh Valley related to federal government policy. Representative Wild and Ms. Scheller will have 90 seconds to answer each question. There will be no additional time allocated for rebuttals. Because of circumstances with coronavirus, we are foregoing the traditional handshake between candidates before and after the debate. Each candidate will have a 2-minute opening statement and a 2-minute closing statement. The candidates, before the debate began, their staffs drew numbers to decide who will speak first. And I believe we're going to begin with Representative Wild? No, Lisa Scheller. Sorry. The one thing I had to remember, I forgot. So I apologize, but we will begin with an opening statement from Ms. Scheller. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Thanks so much. Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Scheller, and I'm running for U.S. Congress to help get Americans back to work following this pandemic, to help rebuild and jumpstart our economy, and to clean up the mess and the dysfunction in Washington. Now, I'm a business person and an engineer. I'm not a politician. I run a chemical manufacturing company that employs 150 hardworking Pennsylvanians. 40% of what we manufacture is exported all around the world, and I am so proud of what Made in America means. I first got involved in politics when a career politician raised taxes, harming businesses and residents alone. I was elected, I cut taxes, saving these taxpayers millions of dollars, and then I went back to my business. Now I've had my struggles. I'm in recovery from heroin addiction for more than 38 years. As the opioid epidemic unfolded, I founded a coffee shop that employs addicts in early recovery, helping them get back into the workforce, living sober, productive, and happy lives. And I'm a mom. I'm a mom who loves my children and wants for my children all the things that we have been so blessed to have: equality of opportunity and the American dream. Susan Wild votes with Nancy Pelosi 99% of the time on job-crushing, tax-increasing, economy-wrecking policies like Medicare for All and the Green New Deal. They are the chaos and the dysfunction in Washington. The way to rebuild our economy is through low taxes, through reasonable regulation, good infrastructure, low energy costs, and a good educated workforce. As your Congresswoman, I am going to fight to get Pennsylvanians back to work safely and quickly and to rebuild our economy.
Thank you. Congresswoman?
Thank you, Don, and thank you to the Lehigh Valley Economic Development Corporation for hosting this event. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about some of the major issues that are facing the people of our community right now and as we move forward. I ran for Congress in 2018, and I'm running for re-election now because I believe that everybody in our community deserves a seat at the table. Since I took office, I have put that principle into practice. I have fulfilled my campaign pledge of holding town halls in every corner of our district. I have listened religiously to my constituents, and we run a first-rate constituent services operation. As a result of the COVID-19 crisis, workers and small business owners are facing unprecedented challenges. And so my focus this year has really been on delivering direct assistance to those in need and to our smaller businesses working across the aisle to get it done. I don't just talk about reaching across the aisle and finding common ground with people with different views from me. I've done it. I am proud of my bipartisan record, working with my Republican colleagues on a number of important issues, including support for small businesses, childcare, and on ensuring that we have an equitable distribution plan for the anticipated COVID-19 vaccine. I'm also proud of the more than 340 bipartisan bills that we've passed out of the House and sent to the Senate. I don't just talk about being independent and bucking my party leadership. I've done it. I voted against the First HEROES Act under enormous political pressure to vote for it because it was too big and it didn't do enough for Pennsylvania 7. As we move forward, I want to keep working to expand opportunity and give every person in our community a fair shot.
Thank you both for those statements. We will now go to the segment of candidate questions, and asking questions to the candidates will be Nicole Razovich-Mertz, who is Director of Research at LVEDC, former longtime reporter for the Morning Call newspaper, and George Lewis, who is Vice President of Marketing and Communications at LVEDC, formerly in Corporate Communications at PPL. George, I believe you have the first question.
Thank you, Don, and thank you to both candidates for joining us today. The topic that's dominated conversation in 2020 obviously is the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic's caused extensive economic disruption, not only in the 7th District, but across the country. And the federal government's responses included trillions of dollars in financial aid for individuals, for businesses, and particularly for small businesses. And first, direct the question first to Congressman Wild. As you reflect on the government's response to date to the crisis, what stands out to you? What's worked well? What hasn't worked so well? And what, in the end, are the economic lessons that we should learn from this crisis?
Well, let me just start by talking about what I think did work well. The best thing that happened right after COVID started was that Congress came together to pass legislation that got relief to the American people on a massive bipartisan basis. We passed the Coronavirus Preparedness and Response Act, we passed the Families First Relief Act, and we passed the CARES Act. And I'm really proud to say that the CARES Act included legislation that I drafted that passed the House, went to the Senate, passed the Senate, and was signed into law by the President specifically to provide for meal delivery to our senior citizens. What hasn't worked so well is that some of the things that we legislated have been rolled out in a fairly clunky way. The Paycheck Protection Program, which had wonderful intentions and has done a lot, was very hard for many of our businesses to access. But most of all, what I think has been the most frustrating part is watching the complete inaction by Washington Republicans over the entire summer of 2020. As we knew that deadlines were approaching for people's stimulus checks had been sent out, that money was running out, people's enhanced unemployment payments were running out, and yet Washington Republicans were doing nothing over the course of the summer. Frankly, I believe that our schools would be open right now if they had taken more leadership on keeping Americans safe. And I have to say, most of all, I think that the president should have been truthful to the American people and should have listened to the scientists.
Ms. Scheller.
Thank you. As a person who runs a manufacturing company that employs 150 hardworking Pennsylvanians, I know firsthand what the struggles are that we face. As the COVID crisis began to unfold, I saw what was coming down the line, and the first thing I did was I took my salary to zero to try and help protect jobs. Assistance was needed, the PPP was needed, and Susan Wild and Nancy Pelosi blocked it to put in non-COVID related items into this bill. My opponent will tell you that, like tens of thousands of others who needed assistance, yes, I applied for a PPP loan and it helped save jobs. Many of these businesses are going to be out of business for good now. What people need now is more stimulus, and Susan Wild is trying to block that again. She wants to put in non-COVID related items like ballot harvesting and stimulus checks for illegal immigrants. In fact, she put stimulus checks for illegal immigrants into the First HEROES Act and then voted against it. That makes no sense at all. Maybe it didn't go far enough. Now she wants to give work visas to illegal immigrants so that they can take American jobs. She puts Americans second when she votes to give stimulus checks to them. What we need right now is targeted help to those in need, Americans and American businesses.
Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell warned earlier this week that failure to provide more financial support to businesses affected by the pandemic could have tragic economic consequences. Many of the programs adopted in the spring have now ended, and Congress and the administration have not reached an agreement on what new stimulus package should include. What is your personal position on additional stimulus measures? Specifically, do you support more grant and loan programs for small businesses that continue to face the economic hardships because of COVID-19. Ms. Scheller?
Thank you. As you might not know, I founded a coffee shop, a restaurant that helps addicts in early recovery get back into the workforce. It's a nonprofit. And as the COVID crisis hit, like everything else, like all these other places, we had to shut down that nonprofit, and those hardworking people were left outside without a job and no way to get back. We need to create more stimulus, PPP, for nonprofits to help these organizations. But once again, Susan Wild is holding out for other packages to go into the stimulus, things like same-day voter ID, same-day voter registration without a voter ID. Now, right now, what we need to do is get Americans back to work, and Susan Wild doesn't want that. She wants you sitting at home, dependent on the government, and not being able to get our economy going.
Thank you, Nicole. You know, you'd be hard-pressed to find a sector of our economy that isn't struggling. Most people in our district, certainly, and across the country, didn't have the luxury of taking their salary to zero. Many of them involuntarily saw their salary go to zero because they lost their jobs. So I completely agree with the Federal Reserve Chairman. We do need more stimulus. It is clear, as he said, that the risks of Congress pouring too much stimulus into the economy are far lower than not doing enough. And I have been on multiple calls with economists, both conservative and more liberal, who have all said that we must go big and we must save the American people and the American economy. The only way we do that, though, we don't have an economic recovery until such time as people feel safe. And until such time as we have testing and a vaccine that is in place so that people can feel like they can go back to work, they can go to school, they can go to a movie theater, they can go to a restaurant, and they can do so safely. So yes, we do absolutely need more economic stimulus, but we've also got to make sure we've got our priorities straight. I also just want to mention that there are a number of bills that I have led that are very streamlined bills. I was an early co-sponsor of the Restaurants Act, which is specifically designed to assist independently owned restaurants, which in our district I've heard from restaurants probably more than just about any other sector. I am the only Democrat on the Paycheck Protection Program Small Business Enhancement Act, which would provide for another round of PPP and would make it more flexible with a very forgiving schedule to it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question is about manufacturing. While many congressional districts across the country have been losing manufacturers and losing manufacturing jobs, the 7th District and Lehigh Valley in particular remains a manufacturing hub. Manufacturing is the second largest sector of the Lehigh Valley economy. It provides 35,000 jobs and over $7 billion in economic output. An idea that has been gaining momentum as a result of the pandemic is the concept of reshoring, returning production of critically needed supplies to the U.S. from Asia and other places around the globe. And I'll first ask Congresswoman Wild, what's your view on reshoring? And what government incentives, if any, would you advocate to help bring more manufacturing to the U.S. and specifically to the Lehigh Valley?
Well, thank you for that question. I think the very first thing we have to recognize is that the only way we become globally competitive and remain globally competitive is to invest in our workforce. We do have a proud tradition of manufacturing here, but I will tell you that before COVID started, as I visited manufacturers all around the district, what I heard from people was the difficulty they were having filling those jobs. And what we know now is that a number of people are being displaced from their jobs and from their occupation altogether. So we have to make sure that we update our apprenticeship programs. I am really proud of the fact that we just recently passed in the House Education and Labor Committee, of which I am a member, an apprenticeship bill that would provide the resources to enable people to train in new areas. But I also support legislation like the No Tax Breaks for Outsourcing Act, which incentivizes companies and manufacturers to keep and expand their workforces right here in Pennsylvania 7. Now, my opponent, as we have talked about before, has shipped more than 250 jobs out of this country. She will deny that. She'll say that she didn't do it. But I will tell you that the Department of Labor has specifically designated 262 employees of Silverline Manufacturing as eligible to apply for trade adjustment assistance, which exists solely for workers whose jobs or work was lost because it was moved outside the United States. We don't need that. What we need is to keep the jobs here.
That's
Scheller.
absolutely not true. That's absolutely 100% not true. And I'd like to be able to respond to that. My business is 100% American-owned. I am the only American business in my industry in the entire world. I'm the only female, woman-owned business in my entire industry, in the entire world. I am proud of what Made in America means, and I want to continue a proud tradition of what Made in America means. Every single dollar that is earned by my business, the taxes are paid right here in Pennsylvania, in the United States, to support and enable American jobs. I put Americans first.
I'd like to take some time to talk about the unemployment situation right now. In the economic slowdown caused by the pandemic, Lehigh Valley lost 60,000 jobs between February and April, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The unemployment rate spiked to over 16%. The federal government's response included a $600 weekly enhancement to unemployment benefits, which was later extended at a smaller amount. While the employment in the region remains high, many employers still struggle to find talent, and jobs have gone unfilled. In the last 30 days, more than 21,000 job postings have been placed by 5,000 Lehigh Valley employers. To what do you attribute this discrepancy in the labor market? Have enhanced unemployment benefits contributed? What should Congress do to get people back into the workforce? Ms. Scheller, let's start with you.
As a person who creates and provides family-sustaining jobs to 150 hardworking Pennsylvanians, I know the struggles that Americans are facing with this COVID crisis. We need to make sure that the people who need the assistance get that assistance, but we also need to make sure that people are not incentivized to stay home. We need to get our country and our businesses back up and running again, running quickly and safely and putting Americans back to work. And it's the only way to get our economy back on track. When this pandemic first hit, again, I took my salary to zero to help preserve American jobs. And today we operate using the CDC guidelines. We wear face masks, we wash our hands frequently, we social distance, and we take our temperatures. Now, Susan Wild wants to make sure people stay at home, locked up in home, and wants incentives for them to do so. She wants people to have to rely on the government for their every need. We need to get people back to work. We need to evaluate if the uninsurance employment should be at $600, at $300, or some other number. Susan Wild and Nancy Pelosi, they won't even come to the table unless that number is $600.
Congresswoman Mild?
Before I answer the question about unemployment, let me just point out that my opponent, by stating that she has an American-owned company and is a female CEO, does not in any way dispute the fact that hundreds of jobs were outsourced to China and India, and that the Department of Labor certified those workers as being eligible for trade assistance.
I do dispute that.
With regard to unemployment benefits, let me just say, let's remember that the $600 that was originally passed was with complete bipartisan support. And it was absolutely the right thing to do when we passed the CARES Act in March. And I'm sure there are families watching right now that have directly benefited from this in order to make ends meet. We called it relief. We didn't call it a stimulus package. It was a relief package because people were sorely in need of relief. But I have also heard from small businesses across our district and larger businesses as well about concerns that they have that perhaps enhanced unemployment is discouraging people from returning to work. And I would agree. We want to be an economy of jobs, not of unemployment. But the first thing we have to do is make sure that people feel safe, that they are healthy, and that they aren't going, that people that with childcare issues because their children have not been able to return to school, and that people who have pre-existing conditions or somebody in their family does, are not forced to return to work. So, am I open to decreasing the amount of compensation, phasing it out? Absolutely. But we first have to get control of this health crisis that we have.
Thank you both.
No, we could talk about the pandemic issue for hours, but there are many other important economic issues that we want to discuss in the time that we have with you today. And one of them is education and our talent supply. As we at LVEDC talk to employers across the Lehigh Valley, the number one concern that they express to us consistently is the ability to attract and retain the skilled, talented workers they need to be successful. We're fortunate in the Lehigh Valley to have an excellent education system with 2 community colleges and 3 career and technical VOTEC schools. What measures do you support to ensure that our community colleges and our VOTEC schools can continue producing the talented workforce that the 7th District employers need to be successful? And I'll start with Congresswoman Wild.
You're absolutely right. We have some of the best schools in the country right here in Pennsylvania 7. We have 2 of the 14 community colleges in Pennsylvania. 2 of them are right here. It's something I'm incredibly proud of and that I talk about all the time in Washington, especially in connection with being a member of the Education and Labor Committee. One of the things that I think that we really have to do are develop more apprenticeships. We actually may have an opportunity as we move out of COVID to get people into occupations that they are suited for, but that they need to be trained for. And so we absolutely need an overhaul of our higher education system. We have to make higher education more affordable, whether it's 4-year college, community college, or some type of certificate training, which often leads to a job in an immediately available economy. So one of the things that we did most recently was pass out of the House Education and Labor Committee the College Affordability Act, which specifically creates a huge federal investment in community colleges and establishes a federal-state partnership program to provide free community college for all students. I'm not a proponent of free college for all, but I do think that community colleges serve an incredibly important purpose, especially right here in Pennsylvania 7. We see more first-generation college students there than anywhere else. And we have to make sure that we increase the value of Pell Grants so that these students are able to use those Pell Grants to go to community college or to go to a certificate program.
Ms. Scheller.
Thank you. You may not know this, but when I first started out after I got into recovery, I did go to a technical school. It was great. I studied computer programming, and when I graduated, I was able to get a job doing programming Doppler weather radar, still in use today, at a salary that would be the equivalent of $25 an hour plus benefits. And that just shows the power of our technical schools and our trade schools and our community colleges. Now, that also shows you how I would support them. I have visited 2 of our technical schools right here in the Lehigh Valley, and I have seen the great jobs that they're doing. They're producing nurses, they're producing physician's assistants, they're producing electricians that are job ready and ready to go into our community. We need to make sure that these technical schools and LTRI-C, which I have had a decades-long relationship with, providing millions of dollars of scholarships to our young disadvantaged adults, we need to make sure that these schools have the appropriate support. Not everyone needs the same education. Not everyone needs a 4-year college degree. We need to make sure that our young adults are being directed in the right direction so that they are workforce ready and can get excellent jobs when they graduate. Now we need to make sure that our for-profit and nonprofit technical schools and all of these schools are held to the same standard and metrics of accountability and credibility in order to get that government assistance.
Let's talk a little bit about worker retraining now. Manufacturing and logistics are a big part of our economy, but the industries are still evolving. Automation and technology are changing the workplace across the Lehigh Valley. As technologies advance, the skills that workers need for jobs in manufacturing and other key sectors of the economy are changing as well. In what ways can the federal government encourage and support workers who are looking to learn new skills or train for new careers? Ms. Scheller?
So in order to make sure that we have a vibrant economy and a great workforce, we need to make it that can use our modern technologies. We need to have the ability to train these people. In fact, last year, I spent more than $15 million building a new factory on my Pennsylvania site up in hometown, using the most modern state-of-the-art technology to create coatings to create products for environmental friendly coatings, both creating jobs and helping our environment. And we needed to hire people to run that factory. It's creating jobs and it's helping the environment. I support our community colleges and trade schools, and I've provided them millions in scholarships. These schools can train our workforce, and one thing I would encourage them to do is to partner with our employers so that those students can get the specific training that they need in order to enter the workforce and keep their skills updated.
Congresswoman Wild?
So the question was about worker retraining, and at the very beginning of this pandemic, we saw the toll booth operators on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, 500 of them across the state, lose their jobs to now that they're automated. And actually, that probably makes a lot of sense. But what we've got are a lot of workers now displaced who actually need some other recourse. So one of the things that we have done, and I just introduced last week an amendment to the Clean Economy, Jobs, and Innovation Act, and it creates opportunities for workers who are at risk of being displaced so that they can begin or continue a career in construction. And I'm really happy to say it overwhelmingly passed the House, again, on a bipartisan basis, and it had the support of workers and organizations throughout this district and throughout the country. And one of the things that it does is that it supports local business by creating a sliding scale of federal cost sharing, devoting a greater percentage of the resources to smaller businesses. And so, this amendment would simultaneously invest in a sustainable future with cleaner energy and in the future of our workforce, which I think is so important. And again, the National Apprenticeship Act of 2020 that I referenced earlier, that legislation would update, improve, and expand our nation's apprenticeship program. We need to pass that bill in the House of Representatives. It's been passed through committee, and it needs to be taken up by the Senate. It's one of the best things we can possibly do for the workers in this country who are displaced or potentially will be displaced.
Thank you. Lehigh Valley has a long and proud industrial history, and with that, a number of former industrial sites in need of reuse and recycling. Land recycling, the reuse of old industrial properties, has been an important tool in Lehigh Valley's economic transformation. In fact, the site where we are today, Arts Quest Center, is part of a redevelopment that has produced thousands of jobs here on the former Bethlehem steel property. And redevelopment of the former silk mill in Easton has resulted in new residential units, a number of small businesses, and a community center. These projects and others like them around the Lehigh Valley were made possible by federal grants from the Environmental Protection Agency's Brownfields program. I'll start on this question with Congresswoman Wild. What is your position on land recycling and land reuse? And how will you, as 7th District Representative, ensure continued funding for federal programs that enable more Lehigh Valley communities to clean up and reuse old industrial sites like the Bethlehem Steel site?
So as the representative of this district, I'm very proud of the work that we've done throughout the district to use these old sites. This is a district that is a combination of rural, suburban, and urban, and we hear all the time about open space preservation. It's something that is near and dear to the hearts of the people in Pennsylvania 7. So one of the things that we do, one of the things that we accomplish that when we use these brownfields and repurpose them is that we actually bring new life to old, underutilized properties. And it saves a lot of green space from development. But it's not an easy process. First of all, it's more expensive generally to repurpose a brownfield than it is to just build new on green. I believe that it absolutely requires public-private partnerships. We have to make sure that there is a plan, that these things are not just cookie cutter. We've got to make sure that we require buy-in from developers so that they are supporting our local infrastructure improvements. If you all recall, the Lowe's on 8th Avenue used to be, I can't remember what it was, but that was a repurposed area, and the developer was required to invest heavily in our local infrastructure, which was terrific for the area. So I am very much in favor of it. I just think that there has to be a plan, and we have to make sure that it's public-private partnership.
Ms. Scheller, your thoughts on brownfields?
Thank you. I think that you know by now that I run a manufacturing company that employs 150 hardworking Pennsylvanians. But what you may not know, that is every one of my 3 Pennsylvania sites was actually occupied by another business prior to our purchase and occupation of those sites. Our first site that we moved to in Lansford in the 1960s probably would have been classified as a brownfield site, as it was a railroad repair station, a railroad engine repair station, and a lamp factory. At my own business's expense, I cleaned up and reclaimed all of that. The site where our headquarters are located was the old Bundy Tubing, a steel bending plant. And the site where my new, well, it's not my new plant, but my research and development facilities and advanced manufacturing was a modular home facility. I absolutely support the reclamation and use of brownfield sites for new development. I think government does play a role in that. And as your representative in DC, I'm going to work to maintain the funding and so we can have the effective reclamation and use of our brownfield sites so that we can grow our economy and produce more jobs right here in the Lehigh Valley.
Let's shift the conversation to healthcare costs now. Providing health care coverage for workers is a critical issue for employers. Good benefit plans help attract and retain talent, but rising costs strain competitiveness. According to a Kaiser Family Foundation study that was just released this morning, the average annual premium for employer-sponsored health insurance exceeded $21,000 in 2020. That cost increased by 55% in the last 10 years. The debate on health care in Congress has deep philosophical contrasts, but it remains a bottom-line issue for employers. What are your views on rising health care costs, and what is the proper role of the federal government in health care? What changes, if any, in the present system do you support? Ms. Scheller.
As a business person who provides health care for 150 Pennsylvania workers and their families, you're right. Obamacare was a catalyst for higher health care costs. Over the past 10 years, costs at Silverline have skyrocketed and sometimes now make up to 30% of their base compensation. We need to change this health care. First of all, and most importantly though, we need to make sure that we maintain pre-existing conditions so that people who have conditions can continue to get health care. But other than that, we need to make sure that we make health care more affordable, and that is done by giving people more choices, not fewer. We need to reduce drug prices by methods like favored nation status. We need to have increased transparency and make things more competitive. Competition is what drives prices down. Susan Wild, she says she isn't a socialist, but she wants to implement Bernie Sanders' socialist Medicare for All plan. And you know, in fact, she was an early sponsor of that plan. Medicare for All is going to cost our country $30 trillion, and it's going to double or triple our taxes, and it's going to give free health care to illegal immigrants. You won't be able to get your insurance from your employer anymore because everyone is going to be getting their health care from the government. It's going to wreck our economy, and it's going to wreck health care for our seniors.
Congresswoman Wild.
So what I'm consistently hearing from my opponent is what I consistently hear in Washington from GOP in Congress. We should get rid of the ACA. We shouldn't have any kind of public health care, but we don't really have a plan for what everybody's supposed to do. And where they're supposed to get their health insurance or their health care. Here we are in Pennsylvania 7 with two of the best hospital networks in the country right here. And you know what? 50% of the people in this district can't afford to access them because they either don't have insurance or they have insurance that has very, very high deductibles. So I support any effort that will get people the insurance they need and that they can afford. Right now, and our legislation to stabilize the market and reverse efforts to sabotage the ACA will do just that. I'm striving towards a public option, which, by the way, would help our small businesses very, very much. They wouldn't have to worry about the cost of health insurance if their employees could have a public option. But right now, we can't just sit on our hands. We have to keep moving the ball forward. We have to improve the Affordable Care Act, and we have to make this quality care accessible to every single person. Last year, we passed the Protecting Americans with Pre-Existing Conditions Act, And I have to tell you, I'm going to give you another example of my bipartisan efforts. 78 Republicans voted for a bill that I included as part of that, which would prohibit the administration, this administration or any future administration, from raising premiums on people with pre-existing conditions by executive action. And so, you know, it's a complicated issue, obviously. There are a lot of things we have to work on, but dismantling the ACA without any plan for an alternative doesn't do it.
Another issue under the control of the federal government that has a direct impact on businesses here in the 7th District is trade. Lehigh Valley has many international companies and companies that have global supply chains. And not too many years ago, about 50% of the projects that we work with at LVEDC were international companies. Federal trade policies directly affect many of our employers. And according to the Census Bureau data, Lehigh Valley companies export between $3 billion and $4 billion worth of goods annually. So the question first for Congressman Wild is, what is your position on trade and tariffs, and what actions would you support in Congress on foreign trade and exports?
Thank you for the question. It's something that I've heard about from companies throughout Pennsylvania 7 since the start of my time here in Congress. I've heard from them about the negative effects of the tariffs on their businesses. We know that they result in retaliatory tariffs from many countries. And in addition, we know that it hurts consumers. The cost of goods to families already struggling to make ends meet increases when we have these kinds of tariffs. So, and actually there have been some studies that show that these tariffs may cost as much as $1,000 a year per family. So here's the thing. We need to end trade deficits. We absolutely need to open up more markets for Lehigh Valley's companies to export their goods and other manufacturing companies across the country. Our trade deficit in the first 7 months of this year under President Trump is 18% higher than it was during the same period during President Obama's last year in office. 18% higher trade deficit. And that's the result of a toxic trade environment that President Trump has created by unilaterally imposing tariffs. What I think we need to do, we need more negotiated trade deals. They have to be the right deals. They have to be deals like the USMCA, which took a long time to get it right, but we did get it right. I took a very active role in that. Originally, the USMCA as drafted would have permitted pharmaceutical companies in Canada and Mexico to enjoy the kind of monopoly protection that ours have here. And we insisted, a core part of reducing healthcare prices is bringing down drug costs. And so I made sure that I led the effort in Congress to make sure that that provision was removed, and in fact it was.
Thank you. Ms. Scheller, your thought on trade?
Thank you. As a business person who provides 150 family-sustaining jobs right here in Pennsylvania, we export 40% of what we manufacture. And again, I am so proud of what Made in America means. I believe American ingenuity and American creativity and American hard work, Americans can compete with anyone around the world in any fashion. I'm a believer in free markets because Americans can't compete with anyone. But what is the problem is only if there's a fair and level playing field. And that's not always the case. In countries like China, they don't have a fair and level playing field. They subsidize their businesses, and they dump their products here in America. That's why I personally went to Washington to advocate for the Section 232 tariffs on aluminum and steel coming from China and other countries. My opponent, Susan Wild, I don't know that she really cares about Americans being able to compete, because just a few weeks ago, she voted to allow taxpayer-funded companies and organizations to transfer important intellectual property to the Chinese Communist Party and state-run enterprises.
Let's pivot to broadband access. 2020 brought a significant shift of business, social, and educational activities to online platforms like Zoom. A Pew Research Center survey found that nearly 90% of Americans now believe these services are essential or important. As important as they have become, they all depend on broadband access. While 86% of Lehigh Valley households have broadband access, among the lowest income households, that figure drops to 60%. well below the national average. What is your position on reliable broadband access? With the growth in reliance on the internet, does Congress have a responsibility to ensure universal broadband access, especially in disadvantaged communities? Ms. Scheller.
The need for universal broadband, it was already there, but the COVID crisis really exacerbated that need. When our businesses closed and schools closed and children went home from school, we found out that the children in our most disadvantaged neighborhoods didn't have access to broadband, and they were at an even greater disadvantage. We need to have affordable broadband, universal broadband, and I support that. We need it everywhere because businesses use it, farms use it. It's not only for our disadvantaged in our communities, but we need it rurally where there's disadvantaged as well. If I am elected your congresswoman, as your congresswoman, I am going to work to pass legislation that's going to create a network for universal broadband so that everyone can have affordable access.
Congresswoman Wild.
The answer is yes. We absolutely have an obligation to ensure universal broadband access. We know that access to the internet can determine a person's ability to participate in the economy. Most employers these days require job applications to be submitted online. We know that students this year more than ever increasingly rely on the internet for research and other assignments. So it's the disadvantaged parts of our community that suffer the most. It's also the rural communities where broadband access is not particularly good. And there are students there just as there are in downtown Allentown and in our more affluent suburban school districts. So when I was working with the Education and Labor Committee on the CARES Act, I was extremely, probably my proudest moment in Congress was securing $9.8 million to support the Allentown School District's efforts, and that enabled them to provide their students with the kind of computer software and hotspots that were needed so that they could continue their schooling. They were, as it was, they were a couple of weeks behind their more affluent school districts in the suburbs. And we can't forget about the importance of the internet for telehealth. Telehealth is the wave of the future, and certainly right now, in the middle of a pandemic, telehealth for our seniors has been so important, not to mention for a lot of other people, and without broadband internet access, you just don't have it. And so I actually joined a Republican colleague, Representative Katko, in a letter urging congressional leadership to increase federal support for telehealth equipment. So it's absolutely essential, and we must move it forward.
Broadband, of course, is just one category of a more sort of the general category of infrastructure. Physical infrastructure is critically important to successful economic development, and it affects the everyday lives of the constituents of the 7th District. The growth of the Lehigh Valley over the last 5 to 10 years has really stretched and challenged the physical infrastructure that we have, our highways, our bridges, airports. The federal government is the primary funding source for a lot of these highway and airport and other infrastructure projects. How should those projects be funded, and what will you do to ensure that the 7th District gets its share of federal dollars for infrastructure development? Congresswoman Wild.
You know, one of the most attractive things about the Lehigh Valley, and one of the things, Don, that I think attracts a lot of businesses to come here is because of the quality of life. But without infrastructure or with decaying infrastructure, obviously that affects the quality of life. We know that Pennsylvania has a C- rating from the American Society of Civil Engineers, and that's just unacceptable. So back in March, President Trump called for a $2 trillion infrastructure package as part of the government's emergency response to the coronavirus, and we moved quickly to introduce and pass the Moving Forward Act on July 1st of this year. It's a bill that creates 2 million jobs overnight and invests $1.5 trillion into our nation's crumbling infrastructure. And I don't think we can look at that as anything other than an investment in the future. We can't keep repairing infrastructure, antiquated infrastructure. We must move forward. We must, as the Act says, and we must make sure that we are creating sustainable infrastructure. As far as how do we make sure that we get our fair share here in Pennsylvania 7, one of the things that I have found discouraging is when the build grants that are awarded by the federal government. When they come to Pennsylvania, they almost invariably go to Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, despite the efforts of this district that have been put forward to secure some of that funding. Those build grants must be allocated in a much more fair way to all states so that every community has access to those federal funds, not just the large metropolitan areas.
Thank you. Ms. Scheller.
Thank you. As a business person who provides family-sustaining jobs to 150 hard-working Pennsylvanians, and we export 40% of what we manufacture, we're users of that infrastructure. We use the highways, we use the roads, you know, we're using rail, we're using all types of infrastructure. So good infrastructure, it cannot be overlooked, and we need to have good infrastructure. We ship our products all over the country and all over the world. Now, there's another piece of infrastructure that I think we need to talk about, especially with the manufacturing base that we have right here in the Lehigh Valley. Manufacturers need a lot of energy, and they need good, low-cost energy. My opponent, Susan Wild, and Nancy Pelosi support a bill called the Green New Deal, which is going to decimate Pennsylvania's economy by eliminating fracking and coal and drive our energy costs up. And it'll make us no longer energy independent. You know, one thing, if you want to see what the Green New Deal is going to do to Pennsylvania and its jobs, you only have to look as far as California's failed state and Nancy Pelosi. You know, California has very, very high, skyrocketing energy costs, and they have rolling blackouts. So I don't know how we're going to attract new manufacturers when we're going to be telling these manufacturers, you know, you're going to pay through the nose for your energy costs. And oh, by the way, you can have electricity on Monday, Tuesday, Friday, Saturday, and every other Thursday.
We have time now for one last question. So this will.
To respond
Oh, I'm
to
sorry.
that question. Let me just say that
No, we can't do rebuttals, sorry. You have to ask the next question, and then
Fine.
you can do it.
Right.
Yeah. Thanks.
This is the last question. The rising cost of higher education and growing debt burden on recent college graduates have serious implications for the Lehigh Valley's economy. What is your position on the cost of college and the impact of the student loan debt? In your view, what, if anything, should Congress do to make higher education more accessible to students, regardless of their family's income level? Michelle.
So let me put this up front. The cost of education is directly related to the fact that the government controls the student loan program, and that's something that needs reform. But for more than 24 years, I have been saying that education, the right education, is the keys that unlock the door of opportunity. And I have walked that walk. Not everyone needs a 4-year college education. Not everyone needs a 2-year college education. We need to make sure our students have the right education. And I've provided millions of dollars of scholarships to disadvantaged youth living right here in the Lehigh Valley so that they can get that right education debt-free. I've provided scholarships so that students at LCTI, the Votech School, can turn their trade into a business, so that students can get an associate's degree, so that students can go on and get a bachelor's degree. And we have created nurses, we've created teachers, there's even chemical engineers that are working for Silver Line Manufacturing that have been Scheller scholarships. I've helped them get these programs all without debt. Education is the key to a successful life. And I'm going to help our workforce. I'm going to help our workforce achieve this and grow our economy.
Congresswoman Wild.
So, you know, my Education and Labor Committee that I'm a member of passed the College Affordability Act last year, which would actually help tremendously to make higher education more accessible and more affordable. And we know that for every year of higher education beyond high school, that will ensure that much more success in a person's overall lifetime and their lifetime earnings. And it does not have to be college. It can absolutely be technical school, community college, certificate programs, and that kind of thing. One of the things that I introduced as part of the College Affordability Act was the Simplifying Student Loans Act, because what I was hearing from students everywhere was that it was a very complicated process. They had multiple loans from multiple sources, federal, private, different interest rates, different repayment dates, and it was just too much. And so what the act that I introduced would do is that it would provide a federal student loan repayment plan that has either a fixed repayment amount or an income-based repayment amount. It allows people to consolidate their loan payments. And in addition, I've also co-sponsored bills that would allow students with student loan debt to refinance that debt, which is something that we can do in almost every other consumer transaction. I'm sure people watching this have refinanced the mortgage on their home when interest rates became more favorable, but for some reason that's not something that we allow our students to do who have student loan debt, and we absolutely must allow that.
We've now concluded the question and answer portion of tonight's forum. We will go to closing statements by each candidate. Based on the pick at the beginning, we would start with Congresswoman Wild.
Thank you, Don, again. I just want to thank everybody for the LVEDC for hosting us, and I want to thank all of the viewers for watching this and participating in our democracy. This election year is more important than any we have ever seen at all levels. And I would be very cautious about voting for somebody who is misrepresenting the record of her opponent. And I will specifically say that much to the chagrin of some people, I have not signed on to the Green New Deal. You either haven't done your research properly, Ms. Scheller, or you've just chosen to misrepresent that fact. But having said that, I have and am the co-chair of a climate task force in Congress, the New Dems Coalition Climate Task Force, because I believe very strongly in working with industry and working with businesses to make sure that we are taking care of climate change, that we are working to effectuate solutions for that, but that we are not putting companies out of business or causing them to have undue regulation. So, just talking about this pandemic for a moment, a lot of people feel like our political system in Washington hasn't been responsive to their concerns, and frankly, many times I agree. And that's why I have worked so hard to make sure that I'm hearing the voices and the interests of businesses and others across the Lehigh Valley. Every Friday since March, I have held a working group telephone conference call with about 15 to 20 members across the Lehigh Valley representing all kinds of sectors, healthcare, education, businesses, seniors, to hear what they had to say. I have constituent call time every single week where constituents who have called us and expressed a desire to talk to me, or somebody on my team has identified that constituent as somebody who probably would benefit from hearing from me directly, I make sure I call those people and we talk. So I'm prepared to work with anybody. I think I've given a lot of examples today of the ways in which I work across the aisle. I am happy to do that as long as we are getting cooperation from the other side. And what I do know is that I will never misrepresent anything to you. I'm a truth teller.
Ms. Scheller.
Thank you so much. Over the years at Silverline, I have hired a lot of people. They came to me not knowing all the answers up front. I had to look at their resume, their experience, and their values. I'm a business person and an engineer who has provided family-sustaining jobs and health care for thousands of Pennsylvanians. I've cut taxes without cutting services, saving taxpayers millions of dollars. I've helped the disadvantaged youth in our community get a good education, the right education, debt-free. And I've helped put addicts in early recovery back into the workforce where they can live sober, happy, and productive lives. I know how to create jobs, and I know how to rebuild the economy because I've done that for most of my life. My opponent, Susan Wild, plays party politics, voting with Nancy Pelosi 99% of the time on job-crushing, tax-increasing, economy-wrecking socialist legislation. Susan Wild voted to give illegal immigrants stimulus checks, free health care, and working visas, putting Pennsylvanians last. She was the solicitor to a corrupt politician who is now in federal prison for 15 years. Susan Wild voted to use your taxpayer dollars to fund her campaign and her expensive D.C. dinners. We have 2 resumes here. Who do you want to hire to be your voice in Washington? Who do you believe can rebuild our economy and put Pennsylvanians back to work? As the president of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce said in his endorsement of me this week, to rebuild our economy and provide enhanced opportunities for all Americans, we need leaders like Lisa Scheller. And so today, I humbly ask for your vote for U.S. Congress. Thank you, God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.
Thank you, and on behalf of the Board of Directors and the investors of the Lehigh Valley Economic Development Corporation, we want to thank both of you for participating in this economic forum, for staying within the rules and following the guidelines and having a very thorough and informative discussion. We also want to thank the good folks here at the Arts Quest Center for allowing us to be in their space. And we want to thank all of you for tuning in for both our live Facebook broadcast and for those of you who will be seeing it later on our website up until November 3rd, where we encourage all of you on Tuesday, November 3rd, to vote. Thank you very much.